Let's talk about the Bad Bug Book, Parasitic Protozoa and Worms. First, let's talk about what protozoa, nematodes, oocysts, and cysts are. So first, protozoa are pathogens. Protozoa pathogens are human parasites. These parasites usually have two phases in their life cycle. In the first stage, it is usually a proliferative stage, meaning it's a stage that enables rapid growth. And another stage is a hardy stage, which allows the protozoa to survive in the environment. For example, formation of cysts. So what are cysts and what are oocysts? Cysts are formed for survival, and cysts can allow the organism to resporulate and continue its life cycle. It's usually a dormant stage for the protozoa during unfavorable environmental conditions, and it's basically an enclosed sac that allows the protozoa to survive, as opposed to oocysts, which are formed for the purposes of reproduction or the reproductive cycle, and it is released into the environment. When ingested by a host, the oocyst releases the organism, and it can undergo reproduction. It is usually a thick cell wall that contains a zygote or a fertilized egg and liberates a bradyzyote, usually in Cryptosporidium. A nematode. A nematode is a worm that has a cylindrical shape. It is tough and flexible, has a mouth and anus, and can reproduce sexually or asexually. It can be parasitic, and it can range from being microscopic to several meters long. Toxoplasma gondii. This is the second leading cause of death from foodborne illness in the US from protozoa. It causes toxoplasmosis and can be deadly in pregnant women and can lead to miscarriage. It is also very deadly for people with AIDS or any immunocompromised people. It is not a reportable disease in Ontario. There are multiple ways people can contract Toxoplasma gondii. Foodborne, via undercooked meat or seafood, and fecal contamination, usually from cats. When no hand hygiene is conducted after handling cat feces, it can lead to the pathogen getting into us via our mouths, and can be found in the cat's litter box, or exposure can be through gardening. Neonatal infection is when the mother passes the parasite to the unborn child during pregnancy. Bloodborne transfusions can be a source of infection as well. Toxoplasma gondii. It is a parasite that is ubiquitous around the world and more common in hot, humid climates and lower altitudes. It has a complex life cycle that includes a separate asexual cycle and a sexual cycle. So the asexual cycle happens in intermediate hosts like birds, pigs, and humans, whereas the sexual cycle happens mainly in domestic felines. Domesticated cats are the main hosts for Toxoplasma gondii and shed the infectious oocytes in their feces. Now, oocytes are resistant to environmental factors and can survive for several years under certain conditions. When oocytes undergo sporulations, they form bradyzoites that are released by proteolytic enzymes in the host. So when the hosts try to, digest the oocytes, the bradyzoites are released, which is part of their reproductive cycle. So as an oocyte, the intestinal skin cells will be invaded by Toxoplasma gondii, and it transforms it into tachyocytes. Tachyocytes can travel through bloods and transmit through placenta. Oocysts take 1 to 5 days to sporulate in the environment and becomes infective. Oocysts transform into tachyocytes after ingestion, and tachyocytes can localize in neural and muscle tissue and develop into tissue cysts called bradiocytes. So, toxoplasmosis. It causes many hospitalizations. More than 60 million people in the U.S. carry Toxoplasma gondii in neural and muscle tissue and develop into cysts or bradiocytes. So again, toxoplasmosis causes many hospitalizations. More than 60 million people in the U.S. carry it, mostly asymptomatic. Toxoplasmosis in pregnant women can pose serious health concerns for the fetus. Fetal infection will cause disabilities like hydrocephalus or water in the brain, developmental delay, and death. So mortality of toxoplasmosis is usually self-limiting, but can be fetal to fetuses via infected mothers. Onset period is 5 to 23 days. Symptoms for an acute infection include sore lymph nodes, muscle pains, can lead to blurred vision or reduced vision, tearing of the eyes, redness of the eyes, and flu-like symptoms. Complications include, for pregnant women, they can transmit it to the fetus and cause birth defects and miscarriages. Latent infections can cause loss of visions, seizures, or mental disabilities. Duration of infection is dependent on humans' health, so our health. People with healthy immune systems can suppress the parasite and will be asymptomatic. If illness occurs, it can last from days to months. The route of entry, so bradiozoites or tissue cysts can be consumed via undercooked raw meat, or oocysts can be ingested via contaminated water, or we can ingest contaminated cat feces when proper hand hygiene isn't conducted. An infection can occur from the mother to unborn fetus. Toxoplasma gondii has a very complex life cycle. Cats are the definitive hosts. Cats consume sporulated oocysts from the environment or through infected rodent meat. Large number of immature oocysts can be shed by cats. It requires a couple days for them to sporulate and become infective. So prevention. So since cats are the primary source, take extra precautions when handling cat feces. Wash hands thoroughly before and after handling food or soils, cleaning litter box. Toxoplasmosis can withstand many environmental stresses. Tissue containing toxoplasmosis can be killed through thorough freezing temperatures, so minus 13°C for 24 hours, as well as cooking. Cooking will kill it too. Once the oocyst is within the cat, it is degraded, and Toxoplasma gondii is released into the intestines. Tachyozoites will develop within intestinal skin cells and replicate, and they can be shed. So when these tachyozoites localize in other tissues, cat's immune response will cause it to develop into bradiocytes within the tissue. Tissue infection and immune response will lead to bradiocytes filled tissue with cysts, and this will remain in the cat's body throughout its life. In humans, intestinal skin cells are the primary site of invasion, and other sites can be brain and heart and skeletal muscle. Next, Giardia lamblia. It's a parasite commonly found in food and water. Most cases are asymptomatic, but those with the giardiasis produce smelly, greasy diarrhea. Infected people can spread via food handling and improper hand hygiene. Childcare centers tend to get giardia because of lack of proper hand hygiene. Farm crops can be contaminated via contaminated water. Fresh streams can possess giardia because animals can pass bowel movements in the waters. Giardia is very resistant to chlorination. People at highest risks are hunters, hikers, and those who drink water outdoors from outdoor sources. Giardia can be killed through boiling water for 5 minutes. Giardia lamblia can also be called, there are also other types called Giardia intestinalis and Giardia duodenalis. They are single-celled enteric protozoan parasites, has a flagella, and can move and attach to epithelial cells. Giardia is infective in the cyst stage and resistant to environmental conditions such as cold temps and chemicals. Reservoirs include infected humans and animals. Again, it has 2 forms. The first one being a pear-shaped trophozoite. It's fragile and dies when it is excreted from the body in this form. And the other form is an oocyst. An ovoid cyst, not an oocyst. So an ovoid cyst that is very hardy and infective. Giardiasis. This illness is very frequent in North America, and it is commonly associated with, commonly found in clinical specimens. So the route of transmission includes ingestion of fecally contaminated water, food, and person-to-person contact. It's also called, giardiasis is also called beaver fever. Mortality is low in healthy people. Infective dose is 1 or more cysts. The onset can take 1 to 2 weeks, usually 3 to 25 days. Period of communicability is whenever the cyst can be excreted and can be weeks to months. Communicability is as long as the infected person excretes cysts. Symptoms. So most infections can be asymptomatic, but symptoms can include malodorous diarrhea, malaise, abdominal cramps, flatulence, and weight loss. Specifically, pale, greasy stools that are frequent, as well as bloating and malabsorption of nutrients leading to weight loss. Complications. Most infections are usually self-limiting, but can lead to malabsorption and weight loss and dehydration. Transmission can be person to person, hand-to-mouth transfer of cysts from infected feces or sexual contact, such as anal intercourse. Recreational water, can be transmitted from pools or any other rec water, such as beaches or lakes. Chlorine doesn't kill the cysts, and unfiltered open water sources is a source of Giardia. Again, Giardia is resistant to cold temperatures. Lastly, food. It can be found on fecally contaminated food. Target populations. It's higher in children than adults and more common in daycare settings. Outdoorsy adults that ingest contaminated water are another target population. Giardia or giardiasis is a reportable disease in Ontario. The case definition is someone with symptoms and a positive clinical specimen of Giardia. So any lab tests that show Giardia cysts or the trophozoites and any antigens from Giardia or detection of Giardia DNA. Probable case is someone with symptoms and an epidemiological link to a confirmed case. Case management, we need to know information about the person. Were they out of province or did they have international travel? Any history of known exposure source to sites of Giardia. So were they in a area that has Giardia in their surface water? Did they drink surface water? Ideally, cases should avoid rec water, so pools, lakes, rivers, and pools. Children should avoid rec water until 1 week after symptoms resolve. And the following should be excluded from work. So food handlers, healthcare providers, daycare staff, and attendees until 24 hours symptom-free or 48 hours after discontinuing, 48 hours after finishing anti-diarrheal medication. If they're taking antibiotics, we want to be 24 hours symptom-free. Contact management. So household members should seek medical care and assess their symptoms. Prevention methods include education on hand hygiene of daycare centers and families. when drinking water outdoors, it's important to filter, disinfect, and boil water. More importantly, just filtering water. Entamoeba histolytica is another protozoan parasite that makes people sick. It's uncommon in North America, and it's usually imported by people traveling from other places with poor sanitation. People with weak immune systems are at risk of illness. Entamoeba is passed in bowel movements of infected people who don't wash their hands. Contaminated water can contaminate crops, including fruits and vegetables. You can also get it from swimming pools. However, most cases are asymptomatic. Illness can lead to permanent fatigue, and it's important to note that the parasite can be killed through thorough cooking. It is also resistant to disinfection. Entamoeba histolytica has two distinct stages. A cyst stage, it's infectious but does not allow for replication. A rigid wall protects the cysts and is resistant to moist environments. Cysts can survive freezing and is resistant to chlorination. It doesn't resist temperatures above 50 Celsius. Next stage is a trophozoite. This can form within the host, and in this form, they can replicate via binary fission, and cysts will be produced. There are about 8 species of Entamoeba. Entamoeba histolytica can be an invasive human disease. E. histolytica is also identical to a non-pathogenic version called E. moshkovsky and E. dispar. Amoebiasis is the disease that E. histolytica causes. Mortality rate, according to the World Health Organization, it's the 3rd leading cause of death from parasitic disease. It's uncommon in Canada or North America, and again, it can kill. So infective dose is 10 cysts. The onset is days to years, usually 2 to 4 weeks. The period of communicability can be, so this parasite can be passed for years, so people can shed for years. Symptoms include intermittent cramps, vomiting and general malaise, severe amoebic dysentery, which is a type of illness it can cause, is basically the sudden onset of fever, cramps, and increased stool production. So about 15 to 20 stools per day, and can have bloody mucus. Non-invasive infection can be asymptomatic. Intestinal amoebiasis is increasingly severe diarrhea, weight loss, and fever, and can start months after infection. When it becomes a liver infection, you'll experience mild to severe diarrhea and dysentery-like symptoms, such as bloody diarrhea and abdominal distension. Chronic infection leads to weight loss and fatigue and can spread to liver, lungs, brain, and the gutterinary tract. The amoebic liver is abscess, is a fever and pain in upper right abdomen, and weight loss and liver tenderness. Complications of amoebiasis include the disease remaining in the intestines and not causing symptoms. But once it does penetrate intestinal cells, it can cause symptoms. It can also spread to other parts of the body, such as liver, lungs, brain, and spleen. This can lead to mortality. Death can occur from gut perforation or cardiac failure. Duration. The pathogen can reside in the intestines for years without causing symptoms. Invasion of intestines will lead to illness that can last for days to weeks. Treatment will prevent recurrent attacks. So the route of entry is mainly fecal-orally. Cysts and trophozoites can be passed in feces. Trophozoites can't survive gastric acid, so it's the cysts that do the transmitting. Transmission, again, fecally contaminated foods or water containing amoebic cysts. Cysts are resistant to chlorine and can survive in moist environments. Sexual transmission includes fecal-oral contact through sex with chronic or asymptomatic cases. During the acute phase of the illness, infected tend to shed more trophozoites that are weak to environment as opposed to cysts, which can survive. Most infections usually occur in South and Central America, Africa, and Asia. Sources and reservoirs, so they can survive in the environment and can contaminate drinking water, food, hands, surfaces. Water is the most common source. Raw food can be a source of infection, and humans are the only host for E. histolytica. People with chronic infections can shed E. histolytica cysts. Target populations. Children are most affected in areas with poor sanitation. In industrial nations, immigrants and travelers are at higher risk. Males tend to develop liver abscesses more than females. Amoebiasis, or E. histolytica, is a reportable disease in Ontario. A case definition is signs and symptoms with lab confirmation, including stool samples positive for E. histolytica, positive PCR tests for E. histolytica, and any tissue biopsy that's positive for it. A probable case is people with signs and symptoms and an epidemiological link to a positive case. A person with or without symptoms is also a positive case. A person without signs or symptoms but have E. histolytica from lab samples is a probable case. We must exclude all food handlers, healthcare workers, daycare staff, and attendees from work until 24 hours after diarrhea resolves or 48 hours after completion of treatment. It's important to identify all contacts for follow-up and contact management. For contact management, it's important to see if any of the other household contacts are symptomatic and advise them for medical care. Advise sexual contacts for assessment by a physician. Outbreak management. So 2 or more enteric illnesses linked by time, common exposure, and location is defined as an outbreak. So prevention and control measures include hand hygiene after passing stool or before making food, hand hygiene in institutional settings to prevent transmission to household contacts, sanitary disposal of fecal matter, sanitation of drinking water. Sexual transmission can be prevented by avoiding fecal-oral transmission. Contaminated water should be filtered, disinfected, and boiled. Cryptosporidium parvum. It can cause extremely large amounts of diarrhea when it contaminates food, water, or rec water if it is swallowed. The amount of body fluid lost can be dangerous. Immunocompromised are at highest risk. Their diarrhea can be more severe or be permanent. They can die from infection. Healthy people will get better within 2 days to 2 weeks. Cryptosporidium can cause illness at the oocyst stage. It spreads through bowel movements of people or animals, can end up on hands, food, water, or objects. Bowel movements can contain cysts for months or after symptoms are gone. Can be spread. The spread can be prevented by hand washing of fruits and vegetables. Oocysts are resistant to chlorine, but can be killed via boiling. Cryptosporidium parvum is a protozoan parasite first recognized in the 70s. It can infect during the oocyst stage of life. Again, oocysts are resistant to disinfected, can be killed via UV or sunlight, and is very deadly to immunocompromised people. Other Cryptosporidium species include C. canis, C. felis, C. melagridris, and C. murus. They can also infect humans, but is only usually detected in immunocompromised or children. C. parvum can be found in cattle, sheep, and goats. Human exposure usually happens through ingestion of fecally contaminated water or food. C. hominis only infects people, versus C. parvum can infect people and livestock. Cryptosporidiosis, the mortality is very rare but increased for immunocompromised people. Infective dose is 10 to 100 oocysts. Onset is 7 to 10 days. The period of communicability, oocysts can be infective for 2 to 6 months. Excretion can happen weeks to months after symptoms. Symptoms include profuse, watery diarrhea with nausea, vomiting, and cramps. So the diarrhea produced can be 3 to 6 liters per day. As well as fevers. The severity and duration is worse with immunocompromised people. And again, the main symptom is the profuse diarrhea. General malaise, fever, anorexia, and vomiting is less common. In children, diarrhea is usually followed by anorexia and vomiting. Asymptomatic cases are common and can transmit to others. Complications. Intestinal infection is self-limiting in healthy people. And dehydration is a major concern with vulnerable populations. And the immune system's strength influences how long and severe the illness is. The duration is usually 2 to 14 days. Route of entry is orally. Reservoirs include humans, cattle, and domesticated and feral animals. For sources, food. Food handled by an infected person. Poor hand hygiene and environmental contact. For water, outbreaks can be associated with water supplies. Water irrigation can contaminate crops. Rec water is a major vehicle of transmission. Again, crypto is hardy against chlorination. Treated effluent can contain human waste and crypto. Cryptosporidiasis is a reportable disease in Ontario, and its case definition is symptoms with lab confirmation via samples containing oocysts of crypto DNA detected, or crypto antigens detected. Probable cases are symptoms with an epi-link to a lab-confirmed case. We must exclude food handlers, healthcare workers, daycare staff, and attendees from work until 24 hours after symptoms stop. That being said, there's no treatment for cryptosporidiasis. You just have to rehydrate when needed. The outbreak. An outbreak is 2 or more enteric cases linked by time, a common exposure, source, and location. If it's multi-jurisdictional, we have to activate FEORP. Prevention and control measures include proper hand hygiene after washroom use, diapering, handling pets, livestock handling, and handling food. Campers and hikers should boil water for 1 minute, use filters designed to use crypto, oocysts, and it's important to note that oocysts are resistant to chlorine. Avoid rec water for 2 weeks after symptoms have resolved. Toddlers should wear swim diapers. Properly washing vegetables, proper cooking temperatures, and consuming pasteurized products are proper ways to prevent crypto. Use a secure water supply. Educate on hand hygiene, washing produce, and educating on the risk of sexual contact. Increasing public awareness in rec waters. Reminding on routine practices in hospitals and institutions for incontinent and diapered patients. Train rec water staff in fecal management incidents with proper filtration, and shock chlorination and pool closure procedures. Cyclospora cyantensis. It's very rare in North America, but can cause illness through contaminated fresh produce. More common in tropical areas and with travelers. Some people get no symptoms from infection, but generally symptoms start after a week after infection. Symptoms include explosive diarrhea, weight loss, cramps, and bloating. Severe cases can produce flu-like symptoms. Without treatment, illness can be recurring. Infection can be transmitted via infected bowel movements. Best prevention is washing fruits and veg. Cyclospora is a single-celled protozoan parasite that can develop within the GI tract throughout its life cycle, can cause severe illness in humans. Oocysts are immature and can shed via feces. Cyclosporiasis is the disease it causes. Death is uncommon in North America. Infective dose is unknown. The onset is 7 to 10 days. Period of communicability, person to person, is low. Excreted oocysts take days to weeks under environmental conditions to sporulate and become infective. Symptoms include watery diarrhea that tends to be explosive, loss of appetite, weight loss, abdominal cramping, bloating, nausea, and fatigue. Can cause severe flu-like symptoms. It also can be asymptomatic. It can produce increased flatulence, a low-grade fever, vomiting, and in endemic areas, many people are asymptomatic. Complications include Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is an autoimmune disease. The duration can be days to months. Relapses are also possible with infection. Route of entry is orally. Transmission includes foodborne, waterborne, and it's important to note that person to person is unlikely. Reservoirs are humans. Cyclosporasis is a reportable disease in Ontario. Case definition is symptoms with lab confirmation of samples that have Cyclospora oocysts, and if DNA is found, probable cases are symptoms with epilink to a confirmed case. Case management, it's not endemic in Canada. Most cases are likely to be associated with imported food or travel. Always visit a doctor if you're sick. Provide education on hand hygiene. Exclude food handlers, healthcare providers, daycare staff, and attendees until 24 hours symptom-free or 48 hours after completing antidiarrheal medication. If antibiotics are used, just wait until 24 hours symptom-free. Outbreak management. It's important to identify the source of an outbreak and clusters and limit secondary spread. 2 or more cases linked by time and common exposure as an outbreak. It's important to activate FEORB if it's multi-jurisdictional. Prevention includes hand hygiene, washing produce, cooking fruits and veg thoroughly will eliminate the risk of infection. Travelers should avoid fruits and vegetables that cannot be peeled or cooked in developing countries, and travelers should avoid drinking water from unsafe sources. Boil if possible. Next, trichinella. It's a type of worm that can infect people who consume undercooked meat from wild game. Domestic pigs tend to carry the worms, but it's uncommon due to modern farming processes. At first, infection is asymptomatic and mild. In the bowel, worms can mature and produce more larvae. These can travel to different parts of the body. Larvae can cause symptoms weeks to months later. Larvae can survive in muscles and attach to bones and live there for years without causing symptoms. When larvae attach to other parts of the body, for example the liver, they won't survive and end up dying. Now, the death of the worm causes inflammation and other problems. Human death from trichinella is rare. Dead larvae can cause the problems. If the disease is detected early, treatment can reduce larva production. Since most infections are mild and asymptomatic at first, it is hard to detect. Late-stage treatment only reduces inflammation and mitigates problems. Trichinella, again, is a parasitic roundworm or a nematode. The larva can reside in animal skeletal muscle and infect other animals and humans when they consume them. Species include Trichinella spiralis, T. morelli, T. nativia, T. pseudospiralis, and T. genotype T6. All of these are common in North America, but Trichinella spiralis causes the most human illness and is found in domestic pigs, and the others can be found in wild game. The parasite life cycle includes the worm larvae cycle and then a molt. So the worm larvae is about 1 millimeter long and can lie dormant in the host skeletal muscles. It infects once it's consumed by another animal, and once consumed, it infects epithelial cells and intestines. Next, molting. Once molted, it becomes sexually active and finds other worms to mate with in the intestine. Fertilized females can shed newborns in host intestines 5 days after being consumed. Each female can release thousands of eggs throughout the host intestines. Newborn larvae can migrate throughout the host body, and it only survives in skeletal muscles. Trichinellosis. Mortality is rare. Infective dose requires the consumption of a male and female larva that can mate and reproduce eggs. Onset. It corresponds with the migration of newborn larvae in the body. It can take 1 to 4 weeks of contaminated meat consumption for the onset of symptoms. Symptoms vary based on how the meat was prepared, how many larvae was ingested, and the immunostatus of the patient or host. Intestinal invasion symptoms include diarrhea, abdominal discomfort, possible nausea, vomiting, acute trichinosis. When newborn larvae invade body tissues, you can feel muscle pain. You'll have fever, weakness, and then facial swelling, specifically around the eyes. Complications occur when larvae migrate through the body and die in other organs, specifically the heart, brain, or lungs. When they die in these areas, it can lead to inflammation. Duration. So female larvae can produce eggs and are inactivated and evacuated within weeks. Migration can decline gradually over weeks. Again, route of entry. So this is transmitted when the worm is infecting the meat of the animal or person, and once that meat's consumed by another organism, that organism will be infected. So basically the consumption of undercooked meat with live larvae. There is no person-to-person transmission. Sources are usually from undercooked meat from carnivorous or omnivorous mammals, reptiles, and birds. Worldwide, it's common in pigs. However, in U.S. and developed countries have reduced infections with pigs from modern agricultural practices. Horses, boars, bears, cattle, walruses, seals, cougars, deer, badgers, beavers, raccoons, foxes, dogs, skunks, squirrels, cats, and rats can be reservoirs. Undercooked bear meat has also been linked to outbreaks in North America. It is a reportable disease in Ontario. The case definition is lab confirmed with symptoms. Lab samples could be trichinella and muscle biopsy or positive serology. Probable cases are signs and symptoms with an epidemiological link to a lab-confirmed case or a confirmed food source, aka meat that was known to have trichinella larvae, and through visual inspection or lab confirmation. There is no contact management because there's no person-to-person spread. An outbreak management's 2 or more cases linked to a common exposure, geographic location, and implicated food product. Prevention and control measures include educating food handlers, specifically hunters, and the general public about proper food preparation, specifically with pork and wild game. It's important to cook it thoroughly. Cooking wild game and pork or horse meat to at least 71 Celsius. Curing, salting, drying, or microwaving does not consistently kill infective larvae. Properly clean and sanitize equipment. Don't feed garbage or swill to swine. Use only certified trichinella-free pork in raw products. Taenia subspecies. So Taenia is a tapeworm that can be acquired through consumption of undercooked pork or beef. Beef tapeworm can cause infection when worm eggs are on human fingers and get into the mouth and eventually end up in the bowel. Taenia can grow 6 to 20 feet long and can survive for years. Eggs can be passed via species and infect the environment. Eggs consumed by pigs, cattle, and human continues the tapeworm's life cycle, and it takes a while to detect infection, but medication can get rid of the worms. It's dangerous if the eggs end up in brain or organs, and surgery is required for removal. Cooking meat is the best method of prevention, and hand hygiene too. So Taenia solium is the pork tapeworm. Taenia saginata is the beef tapeworm, and Taenia asiatica is the Asian tapeworm. These are flatworm parasites that mature in human small intestines. Taenia has a life cycle that involves the worm's segments filled with mature eggs called proglottids, separating from the adult tapeworm and the passing of human feces, spreading the eggs. For Taenia saginata, the beef tapeworm, the proglottids can crawl out on their own, and the eggs can survive for months in the environment. For T. solium and asiatica, it's only found in pigs. When larva is consumed by pig or cattle, they can attach and penetrate the gut and disseminate to various tissues via the bloodstream. Eventually, it can encyst in tissue and live for months. Taenia solium only encysts in pig tissue, not humans. When humans consume infected meat, the worm completes its life cycle. They can grow 2 to 7 meters long and produce eggs for many years. Taeniasis is the infection it causes. It's similar among the 3 species. However, T. solium, or pork tapeworm, is the most serious because of cysticercosis, the infection that it causes, which can lead to neurocysticercosis, which is the lodging in the brain tissue. Mortality for taeniasis is low, but for cysticercosis, death in a small number of brain infection cases have been observed. Onset of taeniasis is 2 to 4 months. The consumption of live cysts or eggs. Cysticercosis is 2 months from consumption of eggs from Taenia solium, that's pork tapeworm. Taeniasis symptoms include abdominal pain, nausea, diarrhea, and change in appetite, but usually asymptomatic. Cysticercosis, which is a brain infection, can be asymptomatic, but it depends on the human immune response. It can lead to seizures, increased cranial pressure, headaches, and altered mental status. It can also lead to an eye infection too, which can affect vision. Muscle pain may be felt, but does not cause much pain. Complication of taeniasis is unlikely, but it can cause the rupturing of intestines and block the pancreas. Cysticercosis masks itself from the immune systems, resulting in few symptoms. It can be degraded via medication, or it can be naturally degraded and will cause inflammation. It can lead to seizures and epilepsy, hydroencephalitis, which is water in the brain, and it can lead to permanent vision damage. Taeniasis duration can live in intestines for years, but can be limited by drugs. Cysticercosis can live for months, but will remain in tissue for years and can cause reoccurring seizures. The main route of entry is through consumption of undercooked meats, usually beef or pork. Prevention includes sanitary use of toilet facilities, controlled animal roaming, meat inspections, and thorough cooking of meat. This is not a reportable disease in Ontario. Ascaris and Trichuris. So these two, Ascaris is the common roundworm, Trichuris is whipworm. They cause infection when soil containing the eggs is consumed. Vegetables can have it, and dirty hands can spread it. Eggs can spread to the intestinal walls and into blood and lungs. Ascaris, or roundworm, can cause lung infections and can move up and down the throat. It can also be passed through feces and cause pneumonia. Now, trichuriasis, or whipworm, can stay in the intestine and is usually asymptomatic. Amoebas. The following amoebas don't cause gastrointestinal symptoms, but can be found in soil and water, fresh water. It's important to note the only amoeba that can cause GI symptoms is E. histolytica. So let's talk about Naegleria fowleri. It doesn't cause GI symptoms, but it can be found in soil water. It can be acquired when our heads go underwater, in fresh water. When this happens, amoeba goes up the nose and enters the brain. It can cause it can cause encephalitis, and patients can survive if it's early detected and treated early. It will kill within a week. It causes primary amoebic meningoencephalitis, or PAM. It's when healthy people immerse their heads, again, fresh water, the amoeba goes up their nose. It can multiply in tissues of the central nervous system. It can be found in spinal fluid and will kill. Balamuthia mandrillaris can cause granulomatous amoebic encephalitis. It infects immunocompromised people but rarely causes disease. It can enter through broken skin or the respiratory tract, and this organism attacks the central nervous system and spreads to the brain, causing encephalitis. It leads to death, and few people survive. Acantha amoebia subspecies can cause amoebic keratitis. It's basically common in people who wear contact lenses that don't wash it properly. The amoeba attaches to the cornea and can cause inflammation and can lead to eye damage or blindness. Here are some other worms. The Anisakis simplex is a roundworm commonly found in fish and squid. Can be killed through proper cooking, can cause allergic reactions and tickling when it crawls up and down the throat. It can burrow into intestines, causing illness. Can be removed with an endoscope, and early detection can lead to removal of symptoms. Proper cooking can kill it. Diphilio botherium subspecies, again, found in fish, can be caused by eating undercooked seafood. This worm, however, can absorb vitamin B12, causing anemia. Heavy infection can lead to the blockage of bowels, and the worms can be killed by medication and cooking. Nanophytes salminicola can be found in certain fresh waters, can be killed via cooking. Usually can infect and kill dogs too. Common in northwestern US and British Columbia. Common in freshwater salmon. So the egg hatches in the river and streams and penetrates snails within. Nanophytes salminicola can infect snails and replicate within snails. The larva will shed from the snails and penetrate the skin of fish. And then once humans consume this fish, or mammals or other birds, that is the final host. The last one, Extringulitis subspecies, is a large red roundworm found in fish and can cause severe pain within 24 hours of consumption. Surgery is required to remove it. Once it breaks through the skin, it can cause the bowel bacteria to infect the bowels. The risk of transmission for all these worms in sushi is reduced because of freezing processes in modern sushi production. Cooking and freezing are methods of prevention. That is it.